Hi, I'm Vidhi Wadhwani. I'm a final year medical student, and I'm a volunteer at ASAR. So a little introduction about ASAR then. Association for Socially Applicable Research, ASAR. It is a non-profit, non-governmental organization. It was founded in 2018 by three of our founders, Siddesh Zadi, Surbhi Dharmadhikari, and Shweta Dubey. And it is a unique think tank and advocacy group with a blend of individuals from various academic disciplines. And ASAR aims to create and communicate evidence for informing better policies and influencing meaningful public disclosure. It also aims to impact research training to motivated individuals from diverse disciplines. We believe that citizen researchers from different backgrounds with shared goals can best solve India's social problems. I hand it over to Chandrika now. Please, Chandrika, go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello to everyone present here. I am Dr. Chandrika Konwar, the Program Associate for the APSI India project at Superheroes Against Superbugs. Let me begin by introducing you to what we do at Superheroes Against Superbugs. Superheroes Against Superbugs is an educational and public engagement initiative to raise awareness and promote public and policy action on antimicrobial resistance in India. We believe in the power of young people, and we are actively reaching out to young people like medical students, pharmacy students, science college, and school students to help them identify their role in the fight against AMR. Our team is led by Dr. Sara Haider Iqbal, co-founder and lead SaS. She's also the Science and Public Engagement Consultant for FAST India. Dr. Punari Gotipati, co-founder and co-lead SaS. She's also the Associate Director, Research Management at LV Prasad Eye Institute. Dr. Somdatta Karak, co-lead SaS. She's also the Science Communication and Public Outreach Officer at CSIR CCMB, and myself. Our main objectives are to raise awareness and enhance public understanding of AMR and initiate responsible action, to empower the public to make informed decisions and help with dealing with antimicrobials, to advocate for evidence-based policies and interventions, to develop collaboration between stakeholders for a coordinated AMR response. As of March 2024, SAS has reached out to more than 35,707 people. We have engaged with children and young adults through our workshops that help the participants understand the multifaceted problem of antimicrobial resistance in their contexts and identify their individual roles in mitigating the problem. Today's AMR workshop is a part of an ongoing AMR workshop series in partnership with Alliance for Pathogen Surveillance Innovation, or APSI India. So Alliance for Pathogen Surveillance Innovation India, APSI, is a multi-city consortium to develop advanced pathogen surveillance platforms for detection of disease-causing agents in environmental samples like wastewater, and also monitoring their correlation with clinical caseloads. It is a pan-India consortium supported by the Rockefeller Foundation, which brings together highly populated cities in India like Bengaluru, Delhi NCR, Hyderabad, and Pune. So now, before I start talking about antimicrobial resistance, let's dive into the word antimicrobial. So what are antimicrobials? Antimicrobials are substances that kill microorganisms such as bacteria or fungi, or stops them from growing and causing a disease. There are 4 different types of antimicrobials: antibiotics, which work against bacteria; antifungals, which work against fungi; antiparasitics, that work against parasites; and antivirals, that work against viruses. So from 1929, when Alexander Fleming first discovered penicillin, till today, almost every known class of antimicrobial drugs has developed resistance. And it is predicted that by 2050, there will almost be 10 million AMR-related deaths every year. So the silent pandemic is exponentially growing, and is a cause of huge concern today and growing to be a bigger concern in the future. So to understand the threat posed by antimicrobial resistance, it is important to understand what is antimicrobial resistance. Antimicrobial resistance occurs when bacteria, parasites, viruses, or fungi change or evolve to protect themselves from the effects of antimicrobial drugs, which are usually designed to destroy them. This means that previously effective antimicrobial drugs used to treat or prevent these infections may no longer work. The World Health Organization has identified antimicrobial resistance as one of the biggest threats to global health. To solve this global health threat, we have to dig deeper into how AMR develops. Usually, when we take antimicrobial drugs like antibiotics, for example, they kill all types of bacteria, good and bad. And in some cases, these bacteria develop drug resistance. These drug resistance bacteria are unaffected by the antimicrobial drugs or antibiotics that we administer during infection. Sorry. They can also give their drug resistance properties to other microbes. For instance, bacteria have these resistance genes that they can transfer in two ways. They can vertically transfer it through generations when they divide, and they can horizontally transfer it from one bacteria to another, which is a very unique feature. It is because of this special ability when bacteria can give their resistance genes from one to another, and the fact that they divide so fast, like E. coli divides every 20 minutes, is that AMR is spreading so quickly and has become a huge concern to us. When we talk about drug resistance, it means these bacteria have become insensitive to antimicrobial drugs or antibiotics by either developing new cellular processes that avoid the antibiotic's target, or changing or destroying antibiotics with their enzymes and proteins that completely break down the drug, or restricting the access of these antibiotics by limiting the number of entryways for these drugs or changing the entryway for these drugs. And if at all these drugs enter the system, they get rid of these antibiotics using efflux pumps, or they change the antibiotic's target by mutation. These drug resistance microbes can spread via person-to-person contact, animals and crops that provide food, infected air and water, and compromise healthcare settings. Though all of this is very natural, misuse and overuse of antimicrobials, especially antibiotics in human health, is one of the primary drivers of this issue. And that is why healthcare providers play a major role as one of the key stakeholders in the prevention and control of antimicrobial resistance. Therefore, today we have Dr. Ranga Reddy, the President of Infection Control Academy of India, to offer a clinician's perspective on AMR, focusing on the challenges of tackling antimicrobial resistance and the strategies and policies that are essential for AMR management in hospital settings. Dr. Reddy, please.
Thank you very much, Chandrika. I think, you made my life quite easier. You have really touched the basics very well, giving the essence of antimicrobial resistance, the definition, and also the mechanisms, how the resistance develops. That really makes my job very easy. Thank you so much for that. And thank you, superheroes, and also other co-organizers for this wonderful opportunity to interact with such a lovely audience. And I hope today we will be able to have a little interaction rather than actually a didactic lecturing. I don't like lectures, so I hope you all also in the same boat as I am. So of course, the virtual interaction is a little difficult one, but still, let us try and see, if we can interact rather than making it as a one-way lecturing. A very good evening to all of you joining from, I understood, from several institutions across India and predominantly from medical stream and also pharma and engineering backgrounds. And it is really lovely to see all of you here today. And I'm sure with such a large participation, it gives immense hope for those people who are already trying to be at the forefront of the battle against the antimicrobial resistance. For me personally, it gives a lot of strength. Today the day started at 6 in the morning, but today, despite of all that very long day, looking at such a large audience, it gives me a lot of strength to probably go through another 45 minutes. Chandrika, would you allow me to put my presentation? Can I share the screen?
I think ASAR will be
Yeah.
able to allow.
Yeah,
Yep.
you can.
I can.
Just a second.
Yes, I think
I
I'm
think
allowed.
you can, yeah.
Yeah. So let me see if is it visible?
Yeah, that's visible.
Yes.
Just give me a second. Let me make it bigger for me. Otherwise, I will not be. Well, that's where probably it starts. So wonderful. Once again, a very good evening to all of you. Please let me know, one of you, are you able to see the entire slide or?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. And today, Superheroes and APSI has given me a task to talk about the challenges due to resistance, especially in the clinical settings. But I will be going a little farther than that and giving you a little overview of what is happening even on the policy front. What are the policies which are getting framed in order to contain the antimicrobial resistance, and what is happening at a global level and national level. Some of that I will try and cover. It's wonderful that I just picked up from whatever the responses you have given. Of course, all the rights to APSI and SoS for this slide. Um, all of you have mentioned various words like, what next, no drug, evolution, preventable, misuse, and all that stuff. And you also have mentioned a few words like economic crisis, right? And you also talked about the global pandemic, mortality, etc., etc. All this is wonderful. And I'm so happy that, you are already initiated into something which can make a difference to the global fight against antimicrobial resistance. But there is something probably beyond these words, right? There are some things, which are related to the cultural aspects. There are something related to research and development, etc., etc. Why I'm talking about, the social aspects and R&D, probably in the further slides, I will probably try and elaborate on that. But very broadly, unless we are going to have better investments into R&D, we are not going to go anywhere with this problem. So, when we talk about antimicrobial resistance, I keep always talking about three things. One is prevent as much as possible. That means infection prevention can play a very vital role. Second, once you have kind of not succeeded in preventing an infection, which could be a lone instance somewhere happening, or it is an outbreak, or it is an epidemic or pandemic, probably that is where we had to ensure that we are going to have control on the proliferation or the expansion of that particular infection. And once we are seeing an infection, and either it is in the clinical setting or it is in the community setting, first and foremost, what we need to do is we need to have a good diagnosis, a timely diagnosis, so that we can give an appropriate treatment. So that brings us to the third aspect, which is the therapy. Therapy is in our hands. Since most of you are doctors, most of you are future doctors, who are trained to give a medication to treat a particular disease. It is very, very important that you get knowledgeable about the available therapies and their rational use, so that you can save these miracle drugs called as antibiotics for the future generations. So before we go deeper into the antimicrobial resistance aspects, let us get two glimpses of two quotes by World Health Organization and also the Nature Microbiology. World Health Organization has very clearly defined, as the previous speaker spoke, uh, as one of the top 10 public health threats of the humanity, right? So as a result of the drug resistance, the currently available antimicrobial medications, they will become ineffective, and the infections are going to be uh, treated with a lot of difficulty, and sometimes probably it is impossible to treat. That is when probably as a clinician, the frustration will build up in all of us. Because when we see a patient, when we have diagnosed actually the disease, when we are unable to treat the patient, alleviate the pain of the patient, and probably to save that life, that would be the most disappointing and also probably frustrating experience. So unless we are going to protect these antibiotics, probably we will be increasing the risk of disease spread, sometimes severe illness. It can also lead into disability and death. This is what World Health Organization has said. And on the other side, Gavin Barlow, he is a professor, who wrote an article in Nature Microbiology recently. He talked about antimicrobial as the greatest challenge for 21st century healthcare. A day in, day out, probably, we'll be listening about some therapeutics coming in various areas, especially, for example, oncology or even genetic disorders, etc., etc. But in the field of antimicrobial resistance, the kind of, drugs which we require in order to treat effectively, I think, we are missing, right? You have already seen the the timeline of the antibiotics and how they were developed, how they have become ineffective, you have seen, right? And how a void is created is also seen from the slide what Konwar has shown to you earlier. So we had to be mindful that, whatever arsenal we currently have, we are going to use that, with a lot of consciousness, with, kind of care for every tablet and every injection which we are going to deploy in fight against the infections. So Tedros, the Director General of World Health Organization, has summarized the whole thing in 3 lines, the essence of the antimicrobial resistance. And what he said is, it is a global crisis and is a perfect example of complex, multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder challenges we will increasingly face in the future. And you are the future. You are the future of this planet, who are into probably your 20s and who would be having another 50 or 60 years to live on this planet. And hence, it becomes your responsibility to ensure that this multi-sectoral complex problem is going to get some kind of a solution. When we talk about antimicrobial resistance, we usually say this is a phenomena which is both a global public health and also an environmental catastrophe, because this is a catastrophe. That is the word probably which would define the antimicrobial resistance. So we definitely need to have a consideration for the antibiotics which are available, so that we don't exhaust them by prescribing in a wrong way or utilizing them in a wrong way, both in our practice and also in the personal life. So, I talked about these three areas, but for the sake of clarity, I will once again, make emphasis on three aspects which are directly related to those people who are studying the medicine currently, or even pharmaceuticals. Engineers, definitely, they also have the role, but they have a limited role in the whole process, probably, ensuring that we get right kind of diagnostics, or designing some process, designing some machines and equipments in order to help us. So coming to the kind of challenges what we face, these are a big galore, especially in the clinical settings. We have challenges primarily, if we talk about the clinical settings, at three levels. One is the challenges in diagnosis, second is the challenges in prescribing, and third is challenges in antimicrobial stewardship. I will come to that. What is stewardship? Very briefly, the previous speaker spoke about it. I will come to that a little later. As the future doctors, the most important thing for you is making a diagnosis in time, in a proper way, of infection. But unfortunately, what happens is, historically, most of the times, we are diagnosing like shooting in the dark, based on probably the history of the patient and also examination. And invariably, that kind of diagnosis process can go wrong, right? And I'm not saying that it is easy to diagnose, but definitely it is quite often very challenging. But our training had to make us perfect in terms of diagnosing, using all our senses, and at the same time taking the aid of available diagnostic procedures. Unfortunately, for us, the diagnosis for the infections had been age old. Of course, other than some of the parameters like CBR or CRP, procalcitonin, etc., which are more of indicators, broad indicators. We don't have even today something which can give us in an express way or aid us in an express way to diagnose the infections other than culturing. I am sure most of you must have heard about the culture, right? If you have already completed your microbiology, I'm sure you must have already gone through the practicals of how to do the culture of the urine and other things. But the problem with that kind of age-old diagnostics is we will not be able to get the result instantaneously. It takes anything from 48 hours onwards. That means we had to make the best guess and start the empirical treatment in case the patient is serious. If it is not serious, of course, we can take our time, wait for actually proper results, and see that the further action is taken. The further action is prescribing. This is again very challenging. In absence of proper diagnostics, in absence of our ability to properly diagnose, our prescribing can most times off the mark. That means we would be prescribing something which may be overdue by giving a broad spectrum antibiotic, or for a longer period the antibiotic, etc., which can invariably lead into the overuse, which invariably would lead into the resistance problem, what we have been discussing about. And you have seen the historical evolution of the antibiotic R&D and also the pipeline. I will also take you through that in few more minutes through some more slides. But in the recent times, we are not having many new inventions in these directions, which means, again, your prescribing habits are going to make a lot of difference to how we are going to save them, how we are going to have them effective in our arsenal. And third is, of course, the challenges in antimicrobial stewardship. Although we study during our fundamental topics and the subjects, even during the pharmacology, we do study about the dynamics, pharmacodynamics, pharmacokinetics, etc., etc. But when it comes to using that knowledge, using whatever we have studied, whatever we were taught, we don't apply that, and that leads into giving the not the right antibiotic, or not the right duration, or not the right kind of mode of delivery. Means instead of actually tablets, probably we'll give intravenous, or we give intramuscular, etc., etc. So definitely, by understanding the antimicrobials better, by understanding which antimicrobials are going to be more effective in a certain scenario or certain clinical manifestation, we would be able to help a lot in terms of containing the antimicrobial resistance. So the assessment of the patient, assessment of the infection, assessment of the current status of infection and the patient, it is going to give a lot of kind of background for us in order to decide what is the right antibiotic to give and ensure that we are going to have the right antimicrobial stewardship in our clinical settings, so that we give the right dose at the right time in the right mode, etc., etc. One of the major problems, especially in the Indian settings, is we have a lot of irrational combinations of the antimicrobials. I'm sure you would all know that. There would be a lot of fluoroquinolines which are actually mixed with something else. We would have some of the cephalosporins again mixed with something else, and those kind of fixed dose, fixed duration, kind of medications also actually kind of create a situation or the ripe kind of soil for the antimicrobial resistance to grow in the clinical settings due to our actions. So what are some key facts? You are already given the background of antimicrobial resistance. I'm sure with the kind of responses you gave, you are already aware of the antimicrobial resistance. But for the sake of actually those people, especially coming from non-clinical kind of streams of studies, please know that this is one of the biggest killer at the moment, and it will be going to be a bigger killer by 2050. I will show you in another slide how antimicrobial resistance is evolving as one of the top killers of humans due to the resistance. And the misuse and overuse of antimicrobials in humans alone is not the problem. There is a lot of consumption in the animal sector, and also even in the plants. Probably you would be surprised to know that some of the fruits and vegetables, they are laced with antimicrobials in order to protect the crop and also to keep them fresh. So next time when you are buying, some kind of exotic fruits, be aware, especially coming from, let's say, faraway places. Like, I have seen recently in the shops some mandarins coming from Argentina, some guava coming from somewhere, and some apples coming from California or even Australia. So be aware that, in order to protect and keep their freshness, there are also a lot of antimicrobials and other things which are used. So be aware of that particular phenomenon. So when we talk about antimicrobial resistance, we also talk this as a phenomenon, you know, which is, a classic example of tragedy of commons. I'm sure, you all know the tragedy of commons, which is a coinage to explain that whatever is available freely, we don't value them. The antibiotics is of such utility, right? Which is available freely, and we usually think that my usage or my prescription, probably it would be a drop in the ocean. It would not make any much of difference. But no, that is where the whole risk is. That by thinking in a diminished way the problem, we are going to accelerate or exasperate that particular problem which we are seeing today. And AMR, for all of you, especially who are going to be the future doctors, that probably you would not have the same luxury as your previous generation. We had a lot of antibiotics available where we could give something and make ourselves as a hero before the patients, while doing the surgery, as giving a prophylaxis, or even in the chemotherapy, etc., etc. Doing all the kinds of procedures without actually giving much attention to the prevention, especially the healthcare associated infections. We were just giving antibiotics and making them come out of that situation, which has got very long-term repercussions. So we could, project ourselves as heroes before the patients, before the community, because we had a big arsenal, which that luxury you would not have. And hence, really, you had to think how you are going to save your patients in the future. Because the pipeline of the antibiotics is in a crisis. And none of the pharma companies would like to invest, because the kind of returns which are coming from these kind of investments are so unattractive. I would not say poor, unattractive for the commercial organizations. They don't want to really put their money behind developing the antimicrobials, especially the antibiotics. So as I said earlier, antibiotics have been considered to be inexhaustible common, both for prescribers and also for the general public. That's why we have gone ahead and misused them to the extent that, they are no more helping us. In fact, they are working against us today, making our life miserable, right? So I talked about it very briefly, saying that how AMR is becoming a major killer among all the major causes of death in the world today. So the projection, as per Lancet, which I will talk a little later, is that we are going to have, probably due to the failure of the antimicrobials, due to the failure of our treatments, we will be losing about 10 million people every year by 2050, which is far exceeding all the other commonly known killers, like coronary heart diseases, the stroke, even COVID-19. Sorry for this number, 3.3 million. It is a very old number. That now the current number is about 6.9 million people who have died due to COVID-19 over a period of last 3 years since its onset in end 2019. So it is going to exceed all the other deaths including the lifestyle disorders, including the non-communicable diseases, which have become a major cause of death in the recent times. So that means if we fail to protect the current suite of antibiotics, and if we don't invest into the research and development of new antibiotics, even the new alternatives, probably non-antibiotic alternatives, because we don't need to look at antibiotics as a substitution to the older antibiotics. We probably, your generation, all of you, probably you had to put your mind on how to develop sustainable kind of therapies, probably even beyond antibiotics. Then only probably our life would be, in kind of some kind of safety. We will not be, feeling threatened every day, and we will not be wondering that if I am going to catch an infection, whether I will be able to come out of that particular situation or not. Honestly, today's that question is a reality. If you look at this staggering number of 10 million people who are predicted to die in 2050, it is a reality that we all must be very scared. Like, about a couple of years back, or, even 5 years back, the people used to be scared about, let's say, if I get infected with AIDS, whether I will be able to live longer or not. And you know that, initially when the antiretroviral therapies were not available, most of those who got infected with HIV, they were condemned to death in a limited period of time. Or if you look at other kinds of infections too, like for example, if you look at cancers, oncological disorders, even today, the hope for millions of the people is to extend their life, or get treated for cancer. That's why there is a lot of fear that if I am going to have a cancer, if I am going to be diagnosed with a cancer, whether I will be able to survive or not, whether doctors would be able to actually extend my lifespan. This is exactly going to be the situation with the infections too, not in very far future. That means if you are going to catch with some infection, probably you have to keep praying and saying that whether I would have a microorganism which is resistant to, let's say, as MDR, XDR, PDR, that is pan drug resistance, then probably saving is going to be difficult. This is what I was talking about, the Lancet publication, which has created ripples in the world, clinical community. That it has estimated that 1.27 million people have already died in 2019. It is the 2019 data which this group of investigators have actually studied and given this. 1.27 million people already have died in 2019, and that number, as you have seen in the previous slide, is going to exponentially increase in another 15 to 20 years. So the consequences of AMR is not only actually the delayed kind of duration of illness, but it is also greater risk of infection transmission, increased morbidity, and even actually the mortality. And if it stops there, it would have been better, but it doesn't stop there. It also has got a substantial financial and also the societal costs, which we will talk about a little later. So this is the kind of burden, this Lancet publication called as Graham report has mentioned that the largest burden is emanating from low and medium income countries, or so-called developing countries, right? Don't worry about those names because they get fancier. When I was younger, we all used to have only two words like developed countries and developing countries. And then the classification came low, medium income countries, high income countries, blah, blah, blah. And now we are talking about global south and global north. Global south is all those countries which are supposed to be developing countries. Don't worry about actually those coinages. It is not very important. What is important is wherever you have resource constraints, in those kind of countries, the burden of antimicrobial resistance is high. That includes India. If you look at South Asia, after Africa, you would see in this blue, the fifth column, which is South Asia, where we belong to. So that is worrisome. That is worrisome, and that means we need to do something together about it in order to ensure that we are going to have a better scenario. So this is again a city GPS publication, which has kind of taken from World Bank various kind of scenarios which can develop with antimicrobial resistance and what could be the consequences of that. And if you look at the base on the upper layer, that is when, if the situation is going to continue as it is today, right? And if you are going to have the low AMR and high AMR, if it is going to be the situation, most likely it is going to be like that, because the kind of irresponsible behavior from both the physicians and also the patients and also the stakeholders in other segments, it is going to be the scenario which is the high AMR scenario. Then in that case, by 2050, these are going to be consequences what has been written here. A decline in the GDP, the people getting pushed into the extreme poverty, and the healthcare costs rising, and including actually a kind of situation where the food safety is going to be a problem, because the livestock is, of course, in Indian scenario, we don't have the big animals as a protein source. We mostly have the poultry or the fish, etc., etc. The poultry and other livestock, their production is going to fall by a considerable percentage, called 7.5. But some of the others actually predict that it is going to be 15% decline globally. That means our food security is going to be a major problem. You can see that the consequences are beyond our clinical settings. The consequences are beyond, the mortality and morbidity. So we had to ensure that, equipped with such knowledge, we had to go into the communities and ensure that, they are going to be understanding that the consequences are really catastrophic, and unless we are all going to do something together along with the community, we will not be able to save them. So we also keep talking about actually antimicrobial resistance development, not only as a clinical problem. I have very briefly mentioned earlier about it, but it is also a biological, a social, political, economic, environment. So that means every aspect we can think of in our life, that is probably there, right? So, and it goes like a vicious cycle. And the vicious cycle goes like a spring. Every time the resistance going into the next level, beyond, our capacity to manage. And that means this cross-boundary challenge, which is driven by all those parameters what I have talked, and not only affects the humans, but also the domestic, non-domestic animals and the ecosystems, right? So that means all these factors, if we consider, you can imagine of what kind of dangerous situation we are in, and our actions had to be really fast and accurate in order to come out of this particular situation. AMR also limits the progress. We talked about social, economic things, but I am sure most of you must have heard about sustainable development goals. We are, the UN has set. UN is nothing but all the countries coming together onto the one platform. UN has actually put together these 17 SDGs, which are supposed to be we are supposed to be meeting them by 2030. But looking at the current situation, especially COVID delaying a lot of process, probably we may not be able to reach those goals by 2030. But we need to be aware that AMR has impact on each and every of these sustainable development goals, especially, of course, three SDG 3, which is good health and well-being. Definitely it gets impacted. But other than that, even the poverty front, hunger front, clean water, sanitation, including the job situation, the climate action, all these are going to be impacted if we are going to leave AMR to grow and accelerate unabated. So here is the paradox, which influences the antimicrobial resistance. There are some regions where we have excess. There are some regions we have an access problem. For example, if you look at Africa, we have access problem in most of the countries. They don't have access to even very basic antimicrobials and save their patients, right? India, although it is classified as an LMIC, that is low medium income country, but our availability of the antibiotics, availability of the latest treatments is far higher because of our country's capacity for manufacturing the antibiotics and other drugs. You know that India is today called as global pharmacy, right? That means India is able to give 40% of all the medications which are required by the world, and about half of all the vaccines, which are required for the world are being manufactured in India. So we don't have the access problem. We in fact have the access problem. And that is what actually the recent Sentinel study, which was published by NCDC, that is National Center for Disease Control, reveals that in our country, from the WHO classification of AWARE, that is access, watch, and reserve drugs, we almost 60% of all our prescriptions are from watch and onwards. That means the lower part of the pyramid, we are not using at all. And in fact, the World Health Organization has given the recommendation to all the countries that access drugs should be at least 50% of all the prescriptions given in the clinical settings. But despite of that, because of the access, which is affordable kind of medications in India, we have a lot of misuse in the clinical settings of both the watch and even reserve drugs, which are otherwise supposed to be the family khajana, and they were supposed to be under lock and key. We are actually abusing them, misusing them. And also there is a paradox of sophisticated technology versus poor or no basic diagnostic facility. This is something, which also is relatable to our settings. You know that there are big corporate hospitals where there are probably even genomic kind of things, very advanced, latest diagnostic equipments and ability. But, go down to secondary or primary level, you would not have even the basic diagnostic facilities, making about 80% of our doctors not having the access to the right kind of diagnostics, which again has an impact on how we prescribe, and which in turn has impact on how we are contributing to antimicrobial resistance, right? And we also have the paradox of rational prescription versus self-medication. India is a democratic country, right? That democracy is leading us also into a trouble, right? That democracy is ensuring that the people get access to the life-saving drugs like antibiotics without prescription, right? On one side, we have the problem of the clinicians like all of us not able to give the rational prescriptions. On the other side, exacerbating the problem is the community and the people directly making self-diagnosis and self-medication with the antibiotics. That is again a problem. Another paradox in India is again the brand versus substandard quality. We get so-called generics, and because of the poor control on the quality, we have a lot of antibiotics, which come into the stream, which are not really of the standard quality. That again leads into the poor outcomes or the failures of the treatment. Because you and me, we may get get equipped with the right knowledge, do the right diagnosis, and give the prescription. But this prescription, if it is honored with a substandard quality, again, it will lead into the poor outcome, which ultimately you and me had to take the blame for. That is again a reality in the clinical settings you have to be aware. So you had to ensure that you also fight, or you also actually propagate, you also advocate for the standard quality of drugs to be available and standard quality of drugs dispensed, with proper prescription. So that means we had to go beyond our clinical settings to impact, some other actors who are not doing their job properly. So if you broadly look at, the timeline, it had a rise, and also, it had a huge fall in terms of the antibiotics. If you look at your left side table, you would be able to clearly see that when there are n number of new antibiotics available, the number of deaths have come down. When there is a decline in the new antibiotics, definitely you see that there is a steep rise in terms of number of deaths. So a failing market, that is between 1960 2000, since there are no major classes of antibiotics coming in, it has had its own impact on our ability to get better outcomes for our patients. And this is a slide, which is formatted probably differently, but it has been already shown to you. The golden period was 1950s and 60s. We had n number of actually new chemical entities and new antibiotics, new groups of antibiotics, which are very novel, were put into the hands of clinicians, making life easy peasy, right? But coming 1990, and even actually the seedings you would see even in 1980s, when the number of antibiotics which are made available and made and added to the arsenal of the weapons which are available to clinicians to treat effectively the patients and their infections has drastically come down. And it is from 1990 onwards till today, we call this period as discovery void period in terms of antimicrobials. This is how we have landed from, the golden period, especially the penicillin in 1928 to the golden period in 50s, 60s to 1990s and beyond, when we are not having the right kind of arsenal in our hands. This is just a slide to show that how quickly over a period of time the resistance is developing. If you broadly look at, although the penicillin was discovered in 1928, but it came as a commercial product in only 1941 during the World War II. And by 1942, you see in the right side, and by 1942, within 1 year, we have seen the emergence of resistance. That is the same pattern, which is following. If you look at any of those antibiotics, the last big one, which we knew as a new class, ceftriaxone and ceftazidime avibactam combination. 2015, it was launched, for example, the ceftazidime avibactam combination. And 2015 itself, we have already seen, the kind of resistance, right? So that's why the Nobel laureate Alexander Fleming, whom we can call as actually the father of the antimicrobials, right? He said in his Nobel acceptance lecture that it is not difficult to make microbes resistant to penicillin in the laboratory by exposing them to concentrations not sufficient to kill them. And the same thing has occasionally happened in the body. That is only, I think, a part of the problem. The other part of the problem is we ourselves are accelerating by excess use, and actually losing all that weapons, which are in our hand. So that's why, again, it was a call which was given by Alexander Fleming when, in probably one of the interviews, which I read long back, is that the day would not be too far. The way the people irresponsibly use the medications, the day would not be too far when we are going to see that the fall of all the inventions what we made. So I think it was predicted, but again, as humans, we have a tendency to not learn, not to listen to the visionaries and fall into the pit, which is already there, visible in front of us. Since the turn of century, again, it is an extension to the previous slide that, how various antibiotics have, come with the emergence of antimicrobial resistance. Unless we are going to stop this madness, again, it is going to be a problem. So I have another 10 minutes, right?
5 minutes, Dr. Ram.
Another 5 minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
So what are the causes of this pool of effective antibiotics drying, right? There are various factors. It relates to policy, and since at certain time you're going to be the policy advocates and the policy makers, probably knowing this is going to be very, very important for you. Insufficient funding, lack of academic research, clinical research, which is very challenging, limited markets, because some of the antibiotics, when they're going to be priced very high, there would not be, many countries, who are going to afford that, right? That itself is a barrier. Resistance predominantly increases because of, these 4 factors. There are multiple, but as far as the clinical setting is concerned, probably these are the things what we need to know. Overuse in the treatment due to poor infection control. I started my talk saying that, first and foremost, focus on preventing the infection. If there is no infection, there is no need actually to give the antibiotic. If there is no prescription or the usage of antibiotic, there is no resistance. So first and foremost, our focus as a clinician should be to ensure that we are going to have a proper infection prevention and control. Second is appropriate use, right? Via necessary prescriptions, and then the environmental pollution, environmental pollution, usually the people think only about the industry. It is definitely a problem. But even in our clinical settings, even in our domestic settings or the community settings, most of the times unused antibiotics we throw, without segregation, without proper, kind of utilization, without proper treatment, which again is a problem. Of course, inappropriate use in other segments is a bigger problem that we will talk probably on some other day. But I would like actually to use my another 3 or 4 minutes, bringing your attention to non-clinical aspects or non-clinical settings where the problem is emanating. One of the key drivers for AMR, is that definitely poor sanitation, poor infection prevention and control, not only in the clinical settings, but also in the animal areas, because of lack of control of the infections, lack of prevention from the diseases, forced growth. In our slide, you can see that right bottom corner, in 1957, right, to 2005, how uh, the poultry industry actually has pushed actually for growth of the chicks, etc., etc. For all that, they are using a lot of antibiotics. Of course, the veterinarians actually uh, kind of refuse to accept it. Maybe in the recent times it has come down, but earlier they were given as growth promoters, and also uh, to to as a substitution to sanitary conditions, etc., etc. And the overuse and misuse in animals is very high. About 80% of all the global antimicrobial consumption is by animals. And about 75% of those antibiotics which are given to the animals, get excreted by in a unmetabolized condition. They go into the environment, they go into the soil, from there into the water, etc., creating a big vicious circle, expanding that circle, over a period of time. So I will not go into these topics, but I would say a few things on One Health. Since this is a problem which is beyond humans, we need to have a One Health approach to deal with that. Luckily, the quadripartite agreement is in place where FAO, UNEP, WHO, WA all have come together and drafted a quadripartite agreement with a One Health in mind in order to contain this problem. Um, as a consequence of that quadripartite agreement, initially that were 3 organizations. Initially, UN Environment Protection was not part of that quadripartite agreement. That was called as tripartite agreement. They came together and brought in a global action plan on antimicrobial resistance with 5 strategic priorities, which a majority of that actually is about prevention. Of course, there are aspects related to the education, the awareness, research and development, etc., etc. India too has developed, is one of the first countries. These are in the battle against antimicrobial resistance. We wrote actually a policy advocacy document for G20 where we talked about all these aspects. I will leave these slides with you so that you can go through leisurely. I wanted to say that India also made its priorities and also the plans well ahead of many countries, almost in sync with the global action plan. We also developed at India national level an action plan. The problem is not the plan, but the problem is the implementation. You can see that the strategic priorities are beautifully laid here. In fact, if you compare with the global action plan, we have one more actually strategic priority, that is the leadership. But The problem is the implementation, which is poor, which is actually not giving the respite from the antimicrobial resistance. These are the 4 states. Recently, Sikkim has joined these 4 states to bring their state action plan. As you know that India as a federal country, federal republic, states play a vital role in health, and health is actually under the jurisdiction of states. So you may have a beautiful central plan. It is nothing if you are not going to have the state action plans and a proper implementation of them. So since you are coming from many states, many places all over India, please talk to your leaders in your state, talk to the administrators who are looking after health, in order to bring as expeditiously as possible a state action plan in your region or in your state. That would go a long way. So summarizing, resistant infections, by now it is a fact that it is a big impediment and a big problem for all of us. In order to avoid jeopardizing new agents, accurate and cost-effective new diagnostics are key to high fidelity prescribing, which is called as diagnostic stewardship. Third is we had to learn how to prescribe and deploy antimicrobials with resistance always in mind. That means we had to follow proper antimicrobial stewardship. In the future, probably the world prescribing paradigms will change. We always used to keep in mind the sedality, but probably over a period of time, it will change. Paradigm will change. The research finding is necessary in order to ensure that we are going to prioritize development of new diagnostic and therapeutics. And in an age of antimicrobial resistance pandemic, that is what I would call, we need to be what we currently want may not be what we really need. So that means we need to ensure that we are going to want that which is optimal for our patients so that we can save all these antibiotics. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. Let us have a little discussion if there is a time. I would be very happy taking your questions and elaborating on them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ranga Reddy. That was a very insightful talk that touched upon the crucial role played by clinicians in mitigating antimicrobial resistance through right diagnosis, prescription, and stewardship. And it was particularly very interesting to look at the paradoxes influencing antimicrobial resistance and how it is affecting public health, food security, our GDP, and how we're trailing behind in our sustainable development goals. We do have 2 questions. The first question would be from Dr. Brown. In areas with limited sensitivity testing facilities, how would you modify prescriptions to minimize the emerging global concern for AMR?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you very much. I think I touched upon this about low, medium income countries with poor settings, right? There are 2 ways of actually ensuring that our prescriptions are going to be better. One is to have a good surveillance in your setting, right? Understanding the kind of patterns of infections and the causative organisms and the patterns of resistance in your region. If you are able to actually have that, probably that would guide you through empirical treatment to be in a better way. For example, there are states like Kerala. Now they have come with state level antibiogram. I'm sure all of you are aware what is antibiogram. Antibiogram is nothing but understanding what kind of microorganism, what is the level of susceptibility or the resistance to that particular group of microorganisms which are prevailing in your region. So that could give a broad indication to fine-tune your prescription. That is one. Second is, nowadays, you probably need not have a full laboratory setting in order to fine tune your diagnosis. Recently, I had the opportunity to present at BioAsia. There is a big conference which happens here. A digital tool where you are going to put in all your parameters of your patient, the anamnesis, the past history, etc., etc. You will be able to get with an accuracy of about 90-92% the diagnosis, right? So that will help you actually to fine tune your therapy. So when I am talking about this particular tool, when you are going to input all your data, it is going to say whether there is an infection or there is no infection, right? If there is an infection, what kind of causative organism uh, would be the probability? And once actually it says the probability of the microorganisms, it also gives you a broad information about the resistance or the susceptibility for certain antibiotics which are required for that particular infection. So, um, so these kind of substitution to culture diagnostics, because culturing is the major one for the susceptibility, right? These kind of alternatives, digital alternatives are coming in. I'm sure those kind of weapons in your hand, or those kind of tools in your hand, are going to make a lot of difference, especially in those settings where you don't have a proper lab. Sometimes even when you have the proper lab, if you don't have a proper microbiologist who is going to interpret that results, right? And that is also a problem. So in those kind of settings where you don't have the access to the laboratory, or the laboratory is not actually manned by a trained personnel, I think, in the future, probably such kind of digital diagnostic tools would aid you to come out of those situations.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, I think that we have two more questions. If you could reply to them in the group chat, it would be great so that they can get
No
their
problem at all.
answers.
I see one of them. If you give me 1 minute, I will quickly, because I just had been to a global poultry hub in Delhi. Actually, this is a part of United Kingdom Research and Innovation Project, which is a 5-year project, which was done, I think, in about 30 countries, 6,000 researchers. They have presented all their findings in terms of surveillance and other things. And your question, Gideon, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing wrongly, Gideon Galadima, right? What's the best strategy for controlling antimicrobial misuse and overuse in farm animals, especially seeing that use of antimicrobials in that setting is tremendous? This is what precisely has happened in Delhi. It was a global conference where all the findings from all the countries were presented, not only the surveillance data, but also they came with several studies how to minimize actually the antimicrobial use, if not curtail. One of the very interesting ideas which have come forward, is biosecurity. It is not a great idea. It is not something, which is not known to humanity, but biosecurity. That means ensuring that you are not going to have the infections by using, for example, vaccines for all the vaccine preventable bacterial infections. You would be able to significantly lower antimicrobial resistance. Probably that is one aspect. Second is ensuring that you are going to have the right kind of sanitation in these farms is significantly is going to reduce the burden of infections, and then not having the need for antibiotic usage. So I can go on, but prevention is at the center of everything in order to ensure that we are going to reduce the usage and reduce the burden of antimicrobial resistance. I hope I could make a sense for video.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy. So if we really want to tackle this problem, antimicrobial resistance, it is very important for both scientists and clinicians to work together on this problem. So now we have Dr. Shraddha Karve, a faculty fellow at Ashoka University and a very integral part of the APSI India team, to shed some light on AMR surveillance and some of the great work being done by APSI India. Dr. Shraddha, please.
Hi, can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Okay, good. First of all, thank you, SAS. Again, one of the I have done many sessions with you, but just some. There are at least more than 35 people committed to listen to this at 8:30 in the evening on Saturday, which I think is really commendable. So let me share my screen. I don't think it is allowing me to share. Do you see the presentation now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so I will not go into the, also, sorry, can you confirm that the slides are moving?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I think we have already heard these numbers, and it is quite apparent that the challenge of antimicrobial resistance is definitely one of the biggest public health challenges that we currently have. And it is just going to go on increasing the extent of it unless we really do something about it. As it was pointed out in Chandrika's as well as Dr. Ranga Reddy's talk, that problem of AMR is very, very complex, right? So to deal with it, we need better sanitation and hygiene for prevention, as he mentioned, right? We need to not just minimize the usage in humans, but we need to use it appropriately. So there are places in the world where antibiotic is needed, but is not provided. And there are places in the world where it is taken unnecessarily. So we need to use the whatever available antibiotics we have at a proper place. We also need to modulate the usage in animals, especially where it is used as, for growth promotion, for as a prophylactic thing. So that we need to control. We definitely need rapid diagnostics. Being a medical student, all of you, most of you being medical students, you already know that many of the times antibiotic is prescribed only based on the symptoms of the patient, right? And that too is often something that is more likely to be viral than bacterial in origin. But it's not just on the doctor's part, but also, this social pressure or whatever you want to call it, that if doctor doesn't give the medication to the patient is not happy. If you tell a patient, just go take a rest for a couple of days, gargle with hot water, they're not happy with it. So, we need rapid diagnostics, which are called as on the bench diagnostics, which can tell you then and there whether infection is either viral or bacterial. Of course, we need new drugs, and this has been discussed in some detail in the talk before, that there has practically been no new class of antibiotic which was being reported in past few decades at least. But to actually fight this problem of AMR and all these angles of AMR, the cornerstone of this is something else. And I don't know how many of you are movie fans, but this is what is called as a Bond series, right? So for those who do not know, the central character of this is a series of movies, at least 3 of them. I think 4th one also came afterwards. But this character called Jason Bourne, in the first movie, in the first shot, finds himself just floating on in the ocean, without any idea of who he is, why he's there, what is he supposed to do with his life. And he has, several wounds on his body and so on. as the first movie, second, third, the series go on, you start seeing that Jason Bourne discovers, more truths about himself. And by the time you come to the third movie, it's not the hunters who are trying to kill Jason Bourne are behind him, but he's the one who's trying to kill the, the so-called villains or the bad guys. And I think we need the exact same approach for AMR, right? We also need to tackle what is at our doorstep currently, but we also need to be more proactive and keep an eye out, start looking for what might attack us in the future. And that's where surveillance becomes the key. I think one of the question was, in answer to one of the questions, it was already mentioned that even in low income settings where AMR is most prevalent in the world, such as Southeast Asia and Africa, surveillance is going to be the key to fight AMR, because all the other things are little difficult to implement right away. But surveillance is something that can actually be helpful for all the fronts on which we are trying to fight AMR. Okay, so this is the surveillance, one of the surveillance initiatives in India funded by Rockefeller Foundation, and the small introduction was given. It's called, as a short form is APSI, for Alliance for Pathogen Surveillance Innovations in India. We are a large consortium of several scientists, outreach partners, medicos, hospitals. We work in really large groups, and the 4 centers are 4 cities of Delhi, Pune, Hyderabad, and Bangalore. I also want to again tie up with one of the questions that was asked, that Dr. Reddy mentioned that it's at the state level where we also need more initiative to be taken to fight AMR. So I think APSI is going even a level below that. And we are actually engaging very closely with the local municipal corporations in the cities that we are working with, trying to hand over the new technologies that we are making for surveillance, and telling the hospitals, government hospitals at the local level, that how surveillance can actually help you. So before I go into what is the focus of my talk, and it's not going to be a long talk, I just want to point out that our approach is One Health, right? As we know very clearly that it's not only humans, but it's animals, it's the environment. Everywhere we need to monitor AMR. Just looking at what is happening clinically will not be enough. And as I said, there are several partners who work in several of these areas. And this is one of my colleagues, Lasya, also from Ashoka University, who basically studies AMR in wastewater in and around area of Sonipat, which is in Haryana, as well as in Delhi. Because, wastewater is something like that mirror in the story where it shows the truth, what is there in the community. Because one of the other problems we currently have with AMR surveillance is that most of the information that we get is from tertiary healthcare centers, right? When patient goes to tertiary healthcare centers, patient has already taken a lot of treatment. You don't know at what stage the resistance was acquired and so on. But if you actually look into the wastewater for the signatures of AMR, it is going to give you a picture of what AMR in community looks like. So that's what one of my colleagues, Lasya, studies. This is another colleague of mine, Dhanasekaran. He studies AMR in animals, especially in cows. So cows who have bacterial infection in the udder, it's called mastitis. And because most of the Indian population and also population worldwide consumes milk very heavily, such AMR can be directly transmitted to humans. It comes in very close contact with humans, same as poultry. So we are into animals like cows. So this is just to give you an idea of what kind of initiatives we are taking up in our consortium for AMR. And now I'm going to focus on the part that I mainly work on, which is AMR in humans or clinics. So most of us know that traditional mode of surveillance is phenotypic, right? What I mean by phenotypic is, when patient comes and deposits a specimen, hospital lab will basically isolate this whatever infectious agent there is, if there is one, and then do one of these things like broth dilution or Kirby-Bauer test, or use something like Vitek to find out what organism there is which is causing an infection, and what is the sensitivity pattern for this organism, right? And then it will be reported to a physician or the doctor who's treating the patient, and the doctor will take the steps accordingly depending on the resistance and the sensitivity. So this phenotypic mode, or actually exposing the bacteria to these antibiotics and judging their resistance or sensitivity, is definitely one of the widespread mode of surveillance. And one of the ways in which we work is that we basically collect data from healthcare centers that we work with, and these are areas of India, and every pin actually shows the hospital that we cover. From these places, from these healthcare centers, we gather the antibiogram data or the resistance sensitivity data. And once we have this data, we work very closely with computer scientists at Ashoka. And what we are trying to do is to actually give more nuanced analysis of how resistance looks, right? So going beyond these traditional drug bug combinations, where you see that, to this drug, this is how the bug is getting resistant, we try to do many different kinds of analysis. So we collect a bunch of data from these hospitals, but we mainly work with the susceptibility profile. So that is the part that I'm going to briefly show you today, a couple of things or analysis that we do. So this is a very simple one, where now I am dividing the available data regionally, and I'm asking a simple question that what is the most prevalent bug that you find in these data sets. And you can see that the first 5 or so are same for northern as well as western region of India, right? So this is one of the very simple questions you could tackle with this data. Now the same question, but along with the region, now I have also specified what kind of specimen I'm looking at. So I'm looking for urine samples, so UTI infections. And again, what are the most prominent pathogens that you see there? Now, going beyond this simple analysis, now a step further, this is one of the approach that we recently proposed, that we said that you don't want to look at resistance as a solitary thing, right? Because inside the bacteria, the resistance often is going together maybe on a plasmid or as a single region on a genome. So we suggested that if you take, and here is an example, all the E. coli that were isolated from urinary tract infections, and then you mark whether each isolate was resistant or sensitive to the list of antibiotics that you see here in this panel, right? Because these are all the relevant antibiotics for treating E. coli from UTI. And then you create this kind of string of sensitive resistance, right? Each position here is corresponding to this one antibiotic. And then something really striking shows up. It basically shows that the most prevalent kind of E. coli that you see is sensitive to all the antibiotics that you have looked at. Great. But the more worrisome part is that the next most prevalent subtype, or the type of E. coli, is resistant to all the antibiotics that you have listed here, right? So these are the two most commonly occurring, and you can see that the other numbers are really low. So the intermediate resistant ones are really low. You either have multi-drug resistant bugs or the sensitive bugs being isolated here. So such are the insights that you could get from taking the existing phenotypic surveillance data, but analyzing it in different ways, which is what we are currently doing. This is the same kind of subtype that I showed you before, but now you have divided, now I have divided the subtype as per the ward in the hospital, right? So if you see here, all sensitive is most commonly found in OPD, OP kind of patients. These are outpatients, which typically indicates they're not so serious, right? They just came in, submitted a sample and went out. But now if you start looking for this most resistant to all, just one, I think this is colistin, the S that you see here, but resistant to most other antibiotics kind of a subtype, you see that now the contribution of outpatient is much reduced, and you see a lot of inpatients over here. They are ICU, non-ICU, but basically almost equal amounts of inpatient, suggesting that when you have infection by such resistant bugs, you're more likely to get severely ill than when you have infection by the sensitive bugs, right? So as I said, this phenotypic data is very useful. You could analyze the data in multiple ways. We get this data back to the clinicians, to the doctors who are actually using this for the treatment, so that it can help them not only to create their own antibiogram, but to also treat the patients. But these phenotypic kind of methods of finding out resistance has its own drawbacks. they basically have very large turnaround times. Typically, a patient with sepsis, most of the times, if you take 72 hours to first grow the bacteria from the culture, then find out the sensitivity report, and then to report it typically takes between 48 to 72 hours. It's too large a time to report to the physician. In many, many cases, doctor has already lost the patient by the time the sensitivity is found out. The workflow for finding out this AST or antibiotic susceptibility test is different for different groups of pathogens, right? So as Dr. Reddy was saying, you really need an expert microbiologist to deduce what you're seeing. Most importantly, when you see a resistance or sensitivity being exhibited, it is very useful for the treatment, but it tells you literally nothing about what is the underlying mechanism by which this resistance or sensitivity is being shown. Why is this important? If you know that the resistance is because of, let's say, an element which is on a plasmid, then you have an information that this plasmid now could be transmitted to another bacteria, which means the resistance could spread, right? Was it an overexpression of efflux pump, or does this already have some new kind of beta-lactamase? You will not have this information just by doing a Kirby Bauer or a broth dilution or a Vitek. Vitek can though provide partly some of this information. And that's why we need to move on to genomic surveillance as well to find out more and more about how this AMR is coming into the picture. So genomic surveillance basically dictates that you get a bacteria, you can detect a presence or absence of gene, let's say by simple PCR, and that should be able to reliably tell you that if I have this gene, this bacteria is going to be resistant to antibiotic A or B. Now, this process itself demands that you have a reliable data from the past and ongoing studies that can tell you that, whenever this gene is present, this antibiotic resistance is seen. And this is some numbers which we collated 8 or 9 months ago to show that how many whole genome sequences are available from India, because the data of United States or Europe is hardly of much use to us. We need our own in-house data for this. And some of the highest sequence pathogens like Salmonella typhi or Klebsiella, even then, total number of whole genome sequences along with antibiotic sensitivity patterns do not exceed even 1,000. This is how little whole genome data we have to build our databases from which we could predict antibiotic resistance with genomics. If you look at different regions, so here every panel is basically a certain bacterium. For example, A is typhi, B is Klebsiella, E is E. coli. And here are the different geoclimatic zones, and you see how many sequences are reported from each zone. And the point is very clear that even if you have certain pathogens which are comparatively highly reported, not on a world scale, but there's a huge disparity between different geoclimatic zones. So the take-home message is that we really need to increase the whole genome sequence to build a very robust database if at one point of time we want to move to genomic surveillance. And working towards that, we work with our healthcare partners, where we basically request them to store the isolates of certain resistance pattern, which are priorities, such as carbapenem resistance, VREs, Pseudomonas infections that are resistant to certain priority antibiotics, and so on. So whenever these isolates are stored in these hospitals, we extract the whole genomes of these bacteria, and then we send it out for sequencing. Then we get a sequence data to build high quality genomic assemblies. Here I'm showing some of the numbers that how many genomes we have till now. We are nearly reaching 150 in past 1 year, year and a half. And we are still counting. So we plan to build this repository for at least 200 to 300 genomes by the end of next year, and make this data publicly available so that you could actually make this connection of this genome means this resistance. So this will not only help us to find out what was the molecular mechanism of resistance, but also sort of have this connection where you could quickly detect what resistance or sensitivity pattern there is. There's one more important problem that high quality genomic assemblies could help us answer, which is where is the resistance sitting? By that, I mean that when you find a certain resistance element, is it sitting in a bacteria which is highly virulent? So do I have a hypervirulent Klebsiella carrying an NDM, or is it sitting in some lactobacilli which will never affect me? right? So this kind of information can only be given by genomics, where you need to combine virulence with resistance. So we are, as I said, we are trying to develop this kind of database for better predictions of resistance. This is my team and my collaborators, without whom I wouldn't have been able to do this. And this is just to sort of show you that we are really working in a large consortium across 4 cities to trying to effectively develop tools, employ them as a proof of concept, and then hand them over to public health authorities, to doctors, to hospitals, to do our bit in this fight against AMR. Thanks a lot, and I would be happy to take any questions if there are.
Since we don't have any questions in the chat box, anyone who has any question can directly ask them by unmuting themselves or raising their hands.
Okay, good. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. That was really an eye-opener on the whole role of surveillance in combating antimicrobial resistance in India. And I'm sure, just a second, I got locked out.
We are able to hear you, Chandrika.
Yeah. I'm hoping that this encourages our future healthcare providers to provide this crucial data for clinical surveillance. And like Dr. Shraddha mentioned, that we need more genome sequencing to kind of predict the AMR signatures. And you guys are kind of the links that APS India is looking for, and can help India build the AMR surveillance in a more refined and better way to predict AMR in India. So we do have some questions in the chat, and I would like to ask them. So first off, Sakshi Poddar asks, what is the solution against AMR? Development of new antibiotics, or to have different approaches against pathogenic bacteria like phage therapy?
So I frankly think that we need to get all our guns out. We can't just say that we need this or that. Also, I wanted to add a bit there that yes, it is true that most pharma pulled out of antibiotic discovery because of, it was economically not viable, etc. But since the problem of AMR has escalated to this level, they've started to realize now that you can't have patients being treated for cancer if their basic concern is to enter the hospital, right? So that landscape is also changing slowly. For example, Roche is back in antibiotic discovery big time. Pfizer is thinking of it. So we have sort of different things changing there. The only point I want to make, though, whether it's phage therapy or peptides or nutraceuticals, all these approaches are excellent and we should try them. But we should not fall into the same pits that we have already done before. So before we go on treating with any therapy that we think, we really need to study how resistance arises to those different solutions. And if that resistance arises, how we are going to fight it, right? It cannot be the same story again, where you had an antibiotic, you use it left and right. And only when the resistance arose, we're like, oh gosh, there's resistance. So that is, I think, my 2 cents on it.
Thank you. Dr. Nishkarsh has made a comment that I'd like to share with everyone in case they've not read, that we need to study antimicrobial resistance in animals like cow, and it'll definitely be better because abdominal TB in India is mainly because of cow milk, which is a very common food item in all households.
Yes,
so
and
moving
ahead. Sorry, Chandrika, just a small comment.
Please.
So we are with Dhanasekaran, we are also now trying to map that what are the different resistance elements that they are getting in mastitis and we get in humans in the hospital. And you will be surprised to see the overlap that is there. Now, we don't really know whether it, one jumped from one bacteria to another. So maybe a bacteria that was pathogen of cow alone, but could exchange the plasmid or the genome with a bacteria that could be pathogenic, because these are bacterial species which are very closely related, maybe a different strain or slightly different kind of gram-negative bacteria. So, but we have not mapped this yet very clearly, which would mean we also need to, do that further, which is only possible with genomics.
To conclude our session today, I would like to address how beautifully we've covered that to address the problem of antimicrobial resistance in India and globally, we definitely need to develop new tools for diagnosis and infection control, coupled with effective antimicrobial resistance surveillance and stewardship programs. And these multifaceted approach with other steps like ensuring food safety and prevention of infection in our water is very important in safeguarding public health from this silent epidemic. So as an empowered individual, you can tackle resistance by enhancing infection prevention and control, by adhering to infection control procedures in hospital settings, by only prescribing and dispensing antibiotics when truly needed by a patient, and always trying to prescribe and dispense the right antibiotics to treat the illness is very important. And making an effort to educate patients to use antibiotics only when prescribed by a doctor, to complete their full prescription, even if they're feeling better. That is very important. I've seen so many people skip their antibiotic course after they start feeling better. So that's definitely one crucial point that we need to educate more people around. And to never share antibiotics. The online resources that you can consult if you want to read more about antimicrobial resistance and antibiotic crisis. These are some of the papers, and these are some courses on antimicrobial resistance that you can take to further your knowledge in the field.